Hi class, in this video we're going to go over chapter 14, so the labor market and income. So so far every time we talk about supply demand, we always look at the supply on the company side and demand on the consumer side. But for this labor market, we're going to switch our two role over here. So you're going to see that the consumers, or the, I'm sorry, the workers will be on the supply side, and then companies now become the demand side for labor. So so think about what is the goal for company? The goal for company is to maximize profit. So the first rule of the labor market is the company will keep hiring people as long as the value that this person can bring to the company is more than how much company is paying for the person, right? So imagine I'm hiring people for my business, let's say for my chicken fried rice business, that let's say that additional worker can bring in additional $25 for the business per hour. Now, that means the maximum I will pay the person will be $25. If I pay him more than $25, that means I'm actually losing money by hiring this person. So company will keep hiring people as long as the value this person can bring to the company is more than the wage we're paying for the person. Now, how much this value is determined by this formula here. So this is your marginal product of labor times the price of the production, right? So think about how many good this person can produce, multiply by how much each good can sold it for. That is the value of this last person you hired, right? So again, let's go back to my chicken fried rice business. Let's suppose this last worker can produce additional 10 order of chicken fried rice. And then for each order, I can sell this for $10. Then this person can bring to the company additional value of $100, 10 times 10, right? So when I pay this person, then the maximum I will pay him will be $100, because anything more than that, I'm losing money, right? So it's the marginal product labor. So how much production this additional labor can produce, multiplied by what is the price I can sell this good for. Now, also know that in a perfectly competitive labor market, the company will keep hiring people at the same wage because the market is very competitive. So there will be just one single wage for the entire market. Now, for any companies, we're assuming that they're going to have two type of input. They're going to be using capital, which is the equipment, the tools, the machines, and then they have labors. Assuming the capital for the company is fixed. So how much computers, how much tools, how much machines we have is fixed. Then if you just keep hiring more and more people in the company, then the productivity for each additional worker is getting less and less and less, right? So let's think about my chicken fried rice business again, right? So I have just one stove. I have one chef. Perfect. But what if I hire a second chef? Well, with just one stove, then the second chef is less efficient as the first chef because the first chef has a dedicated stove for him. And if you keep hiring more and more chefs in the company, only have one stove in the company, then each additional chef become less and less competitive, less and less productive, right? So the marginal product labor, the additional production for the workers, holding capital fixed, then the marginal production of labor is actually decreasing as the more and more people you hire in the company. So just like the marginal product curve that's decreasing, so it's the more and more worker you hire, the workers are producing less and less good. The value of marginal product labor, so how much value this employee brings to the company, is also decreasing since the MPL is decreasing. So therefore, the VMPL curve is also decreasing. So the additional value the new employee can bring to the company is becoming less and less and less. So this line here is also going down just like the MPL curve. Now we can think this VMPL curve as the demand for labor. So this is how much company demand for labor because each VMPL of each additional worker, that's how much a value to the company is, right? So therefore it's also decreasing as the more and more labor we hire. All right, so if you put the two and two together, so let's suppose right now we have a wage for the market. So wage is right here. So this is a perfectly competitive market. We have a flat supply curve. And then the wage is already determined. So how many worker we hire, it depends on the demand curve, which is the VMPL curve. So this intersection here, that will determine how many employees company will hire, and then wage is already decided in the market. Now, for any company who is not selling in a perfectly competitive market, so imagine company like monopoly, oligopoly, or monopolistic competition. So for those companies, their price doesn't equal to the marginal revenue, right? So for those companies, their VMPL is slightly different. So instead of using the MP, the marginal product, times the price, but they're times the marginal revenue. So the marginal revenue product is equal to the marginal product of each individual worker times the marginal revenue of each worker they can bring to the company. And since that for a company in an imperfect competition, so monopoly, oligopolies, that they do have a marginal revenue curve that's less than the actual price of the product. So for the perfect competition, you're gonna see a VMPL curve that's to the outside of a VMPL curve representing by your monopoly company. Because in monopoly market, the marginal revenue is less than the margin revenue in a perfect competition. So in a perfect competition market, not only are the consumer benefit, but also the workers benefit as well. Because for those workers, their marginal revenue is more than the margin revenue in a monopoly situation. So in a perfect competition, workers also getting paid higher wages as well because their marginal revenue is more than the margin revenue produced in a monopoly situation. So therefore, the wage in the market is not determined by individual companies or individual workers, but the wage in the market is actually determined by the supply demand of the labor market. So how many households, how many workers are willing to work versus how many companies are hiring right now. So if you graph our supply demand diagram just like before, on this market supply curve, this is the number of workers who are willing to work, and the market demand curve, the number of companies who are hiring people right now. So the intersection between the two, that will determine how much the wage is in the market and how much is the total number of labor in the market. All right, so a couple more definitions. So know what's a monopsony. So monopoly, that's when you have only one seller for the good. Monopsony is when you only have a one buyer for the good. Now this exists in many of the smaller labor market. So think about maybe a small town, let's say Birmingham, Texas, right? So Bluebell is a big employer in the town, right? So that might be a monopsony situation. So people in the town doesn't have a choice because the only one who is hiring is Bluebell ice cream, right? So that's a monopoly situation. Now, for a monopoly situation, it's very similar to a monopoly situation. So, a company who is a monopoly, they have a lot of power, right? So they're gonna try to keep the wage as low as possible because their power over the market. Now, also know what's a marginal cost of labor. So this will be just the cost of hiring additional workers. All right, so since monopoly company is the only company in town, they're the only demander for labor, so they're facing the entire labor supply curve. And for a monopoly company, in order to hire more workers, they have to increase wage for everybody in the company. So imagine right now, let's suppose Bluebell Ice Cream is hiring 10 people, and they're paying each person $10 per hour. But to hire the next person, Bluebell Ice Cream must increase the wage to $11 per hour to hire additional workers. But that $11 per hour is not just paid to the one person you're hiring in, but it's also paying to everybody else who is already in the company. So now the marginal cost of hiring the 11th worker is actually way more than how much you're paying the 11th worker because you're also paying additional wages to the 10 people who's already in the company. So that's why for monopolies that their marginal cost of hiring additional worker is more than the wage you're paying for the last person you hired. So for the monopoly company in this market here, the first thing we need to determine where the marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. Now we have the marginal cost here. The marginal revenue, that's going to be our demand curve. That's the VMPL we mentioned earlier. So the first thing we'll find out is where the marginal cost equal to marginal revenue. Go down, get a quantity. So this is how many workers the monopoly company will hire. Now how much the wage is going to be, that'll be on the supply curve. So company will pay a wage at the WM level. That's a monopoly wage. Now, if you compare this to a perfect competition, so for a perfect competition, their wage will be paid at the intersection between the supply demand curve. So in the perfect competition or in a competitive market, wage is more than the wage paid by monopoly. So that's why this is where the market power comes in. So monopoly can pay workers lower wage because workers has no choices that they will have to work for this one company. So company with some market power can pay a lower wage and also keep a bigger share of the market profit. All right, so a couple more definitions. So NOAA is a labor union. So we have these monopoly organizations. So what can we do to fight against it? What can the workers do? They can form labor unions. So labor unions, whenever the workers come together to form a group to negotiate with the employers on wage and working conditions. Some of the most very well known labor unions you guys probably learned in your history class before. Remember that book by it's called The Jungle by Upton Sinclair back in 1930s, really described the terrible working condition in the meat packing industry. So once that book came out, many workers in the industry formed unions, and with union, they can negotiate as a group with the company. And then the most effective tool union has is strike, right? So you don't give us what we want, we cannot get to an agreement, we're gonna strike, then nobody work for you anymore. So this is also called collective bargaining. So that's the negotiation between unions and firms. All right, so if you look at the participation of unions in America, we saw an increase of union participation back in early 1950s, but since 1950s, the unions has been coming down very steadily. So today, unions only representing about 10% of all workers in America. Some of the very well-known unions, think about the writers of Hollywood, the actors of Hollywood, the unions for workers at the auto industry. So in 2023, that's where also those strike happened, right? So that's the power of union. They have the power of collective bargaining and then call strike, try to negotiate on a better condition against the companies. So in theory, when you have a union is able to negotiate a wage that's more than the equilibrium. But one downside of having a too high of a wage, so if your wage is settled over here, when it's too high, then this might create labor surplus in the economy. That there will be some workers who want to have a job because wage is very high, but company hire less people, then you're gonna see a labor surplus in the industry. Okay, so that's one downside of labor union. Also known as the National Labor Relations Act. So this really stated out the workers' right to organize unions, and then the management had to give them a fair chance to do so. So management cannot prohibit workers from forming union. Now there are also laws in different states. For example, in Texas, we have what is called the right to work law. That means any workers doesn't have to join union to work in a company. So there are both laws for union and laws against union. So some of the reasons that contribute to this decline of labor union participation, one reason is because many of the union concentrated industry, let's say the steel industry, the car industry, has been experiencing a very steady decline in the last 30, 40 years. So those jobs are just simply not there anymore, right? So as the economy switching to a more service industry jobs, the workers doesn't have any opportunity yet to form unions, but they are happening. So for example, many of the Starbucks in the country have formed unions now. Many of the fast food workers also form unions as well, right? So the representation for unions is coming back, but it's at a very slower pace. Um, Now, it is also need to note that many of the states, especially besides our East Coast, West Coast, many of the states in the Middle America, so Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Mississippi, has been introducing more and more laws that discourage workers from joining union. So those right to work law says workers doesn't have to join union to be part of the company. But in many industry in the East Coast, especially in the Northeast area, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, many companies are what is called a closed shop company. So workers have to join union first before they can work for the company. So everybody in the company, all the workers are already part of the union, right? So different environment, different legal environment, definitely gonna see a different participation for labor unions. Now, outside of the government employees, the labor union participation has been really decreasing, especially for many of the new companies. The labor union participation is just not there anymore because in the past, the workers will stay with the company for the entire career, so 30, 40 years. But now workers are more transit, that they tend to stay with the company for just a couple of years. So there was not that much incentive to join a union. So for many workers, when they don't like what is happening at the company, they will just simply switch companies. So for wages in a market, when you see a monopoly and a monopoly situation, then where the wage will be an indeterminate. So the wage will be somewhere between what the monopoly level wage is and what the union level wage is. So somewhere in here, that's where the wage is going to be. And this is where the negotiation comes in. So some of the perfect example, think about the auto industry. So in the auto industry, the big three company you have Ford, GM, and Chrysler, they're in a constant negotiation with the labor unions representing all the auto workers. So those wages are up to the negotiation between different companies. So also knows the discrimination. So discrimination is whenever acting on the belief that members of certain group are inferior due to race, gender, and religion. And in the labor market, we do see discrimination as well historically, and also evidence is available today. So if you look at the pay gap between black and white workers, there's always a pay gap. Today, a black worker only earns about 70% of a white worker. And also, if you look at the male and female number, now the gender gap has been closing up, but today there's still a gap existing. So a female worker will earn about 75% of the male worker. Now, this is um, capturing all the different factors such as the type of works, the years of experiences, the type of positions. So holding everything else constant, we still see this gender pay gap and also racial pay gap of workers in America. When we look at the gender pay gap between male and female, one of the big reasons why this gap has been closing in recent years was definitely because the changing dynamic in the education field and education performance between female and male students. So if you look at the degree attainment between male and female, I'm sorry, boys, girls are doing better than boys in college education. So female students have been having a higher level of degree attainment than male students. So more and more female students are getting the college degrees than male students. And because of that, female students are better suited for the requirement of the new global labor force. So they are better equipped to take on the high demand jobs with a higher pay. And that's one reason why the gap has been closing between male and females. But if you look at the fundamentals, we still see this big discrepancy between male and female pay rate. And one reason might be because it's just rooted in our social pattern that then mom are still expected to take on majority of the housework, while dad is expected to be the breadwinner of the family. Now, that's not speaking to all the families, but at least it is still true for majority of Americans, and that is evident during the early onset of the pandemic. So when we saw many of the families were locked down in the house, the kids couldn't go to school anymore. It is often the duty of the mom to leave her job and then stay home and then educate the children, for stay home for stay home at home studies, right? So that culture change is still need to be worked on for some gender equality, but at least for now, that we still see this pay gap between male and females. Now, if you look at the pay gap between racial ethnicities, it's still evident between white and black and also Hispanics. And one of the big difference can be contribute to the education level. But to fix that issue really requires a lot of changes in our education system. Because if you look at nationwide, if you look at the performance of middle school, high school, elementary school students on different racial line, there's a big performance gap between Hispanics, black, and also white students. That's why we have affirmative action. So you guys probably heard this in the school that more than often affirmative action is used by colleges for admissions. That there will be certain percentage of the college admission enrollment is reserved for certain ethnicities. Now in government business is also true that in government there's still some contract, some positions are reserved, a portion of it is reserved specifically for minority applications. Now, the affirmative action, however, it is under threat. The Supreme Court recently struck it down. So what happens now? Well, we see what happens, right? So at least for now, for higher education, affirmative action is no longer relevant. One important trend in the demographic changes in the U.S. population is that as time goes, as we go to the next several decades, the U.S. is slowly becoming a minority majority country. That many of the minorities, such as Black, Asian, Hispanics, are going to see an increasing representation of our U.S. population, while the white population is getting a smaller percentage of the overall population. So many of the discrepancies in income, in education, between genders, and especially race and ethnicity, those questions need to be addressed as the country is changing in demographics. All right, so lastly, let's look at immigration. All right, so if you look at the U.S. immigration, we already see this increasing of immigration since the 1980s, especially it peaked about the early 2000s, and then since 2010 to 2019, has coming down slowly. So this increasing in immigration has really been a big impact in the shift in our labor market. So for many economists, we believe that immigration overall has a net positive impact on the economy, because for one, and the most important one, is that immigrants, especially those who are recently come to the country, they're more than likely to take on the jobs that our workers in America don't want to take. So for example, think about many of the migrant workers working in the farm who are traveling between different states. Our US workers, we don't like those jobs. And also think about in the meat packing industry, our U.S. workers, we don't want those jobs. So those jobs are filled primarily with newly come immigrants from other countries. So that's a positive impact. So those immigrants are filling a gap that's left currently in our domestic labor market. And overall, immigrants will pay taxes when they work, will contribute to the local economy. They will be buying stuff. They'll be generating more demand, more services. So overall, it is a positive for the economy. However, they are competing in some situations for jobs that's currently held by workers in America who are low skilled, who are easily replaced. But at least for the overall economy, it is a net positive. Okay. All right, guys. So that's it for this chapter. Any question, let me know, and I will see you guys for the next chapter. All right. Bye bye.